the one and the many. Self, time, symbol, power, and the dream of separation. There is a question hidden underneath almost every spiritual system mankind has ever constructed. What exactly is the thing we call I? We speak about ourselves as though the answer were obvious. I was born. I am here. One day I will die. Simple enough. Except it isn't. Before I existed, where was this thing I now call myself? Then suddenly there was conception, birth, childhood, memory, personality, experience, suffering, desire, thought, identity, and eventually this organism will disappear again. There was apparently no me. Then there was me. Then apparently there will be no me again. So what exactly are we counting? That question becomes even stranger when reincarnation enters the picture. Imagine that reincarnation were literally true in the simplest possible sense. I die. Eventually another human being is born, and somehow that person is me again. Fine. Then suppose I wanted to leave that future version of myself some money. I bury it somewhere. I leave clues. Maybe I put something permanently on the internet for the whole world to see. But immediately we run into the real problem. How would the future person know the message was addressed to him? If he has another body, another name, another family, another language, another personality, and no memory of writing the message, in what meaningful sense is he the same person who buried the money? That silly little thought experiment suddenly lands directly in one of philosophy's oldest problems, personal identity through time. Philosophers have argued about whether identity depends upon bodily continuity, memory, consciousness, psychology, or something deeper still. The treasure is almost irrelevant. The real treasure hidden in the problem is the question: what survives strongly enough for me to remain me? The English word self itself does not come from Latin. It reaches back through Old English and the Germanic languages, carrying meanings connected with one's own person, one's own identity, the same being. But the word is not the thing. A civilization can invent 10,000 words for the self without ever capturing what the self actually is. Indian philosophy approached the problem through terms such as Ātman, the inner self or essence. But even there we have to be careful, because Indian traditions themselves do not all agree about what that means. Some Hindu schools understand an enduring self. Buddhist traditions famously challenge precisely that idea and deny that an unchanging personal essence can be found. That disagreement is important. These people were not stupid. They had noticed the same problem. When I say what am I pointing toward? My body? That body has changed continuously. My memories? I forget things. My personality? That changes too. My name? Somebody else gave it to me. My possessions? They disappear. My thoughts? Try grabbing one and holding it still. The closer we inspect the self, the more the supposedly solid object begins behaving like water in the hand. And this brings us to the one. There is a passage in the Tao Te Ching that has fascinated people for centuries. The Tao gives rise to one. One gives rise to two. Two gives rise to three. Three gives rise to the myriad things. The important point is not arithmetic. One here need not be treated as the little numeral sitting between 0 and 2. Scholarly interpretations of the passage specifically describe a movement from unity toward multiplicity, while also noting that the one itself is not ultimate. The Tao precedes it. That is very close to what mystics continually attempt to express and continually fail to express completely. The one is not merely one object. It symbolizes undivided potentiality before division gives us this and that, subject and object, inside and outside, self and other. Think of water. Imagine 1,000 droplets scattered across a surface. We can count them. 1 droplet. 2 droplets. 3. 1,000. Each appears separate because each has a boundary. Now allow two droplets to touch. Where did the two go? Nothing was destroyed. They simply ceased expressing themselves as two separated forms. The distinction existed because of the boundary. Remove the boundary and the distinction disappears. Eventually, every drop can return to one body of water. So was the water ever truly divided? Yes. And no. That is where ordinary language starts screaming for help. From one perspective, there were absolutely separate droplets. From another perspective, there was only ever water temporarily appearing through separated forms. This is why mystical thought so often sounds contradictory. Yes, but no. No, but yes. Yin within yang. Yang within yin. The contradiction is not always stupidity. Sometimes it appears because we are attempting to describe two levels of perception simultaneously. Consider humanity. We say there are more people on Earth today than there were yesterday. Within ordinary human measurement, of course that statement can be true. People are born. People die. We count bodies. But metaphysically, we can ask another question. If every apparently separate being is an expression within some underlying whole, has the whole actually increased? If 10 waves rise from the ocean instead of 5, did we acquire more ocean? The number of waves changed. The water did not necessarily become 10 different substances. This is not a scientific claim that population statistics are false. Population statistics describe the level on which counting makes sense. The occult question is whether counting exhausts reality. I don't think it does. Numbers measure distinctions. They require boundaries. Before I can say two, something must have been separated conceptually from something else. Mathematics is extraordinarily powerful precisely because the universe permits us to distinguish structures and relationships. But the mystic asks what existed before the knife of distinction came down. What is the condition prior to counting? What is the one before the many? And this brings us directly to time. We speak about existence as though existence were an object. But perhaps what we ordinarily call existence is closer to a flame. The flame appears. It burns. It changes every instant. Then it disappears. Or a breeze. It comes through the trees. We notice it because leaves move against it. Then it passes. Where did the breeze go? Or water becoming vapor. The form changes. Our classification changes. But nature itself has not consulted our vocabulary. The human mind says, that thing began here. That thing ended there. That was one person. That was another person. That person existed. Now that person does not exist. Those distinctions are necessary if we're going to function. But mysticism has always suspected that necessary distinctions and ultimate truth are not necessarily identical things. This also explains why symbols matter so much. People sometimes look at religious ritual and see foolishness. A man touches a wall. Another circles a building. Another lights incense. Another bows toward 4 directions. Another sprinkles water. Someone wears a particular garment. Someone kisses a stone. If you only look at the physical action, the whole human species looks completely insane. But ritual is physical language. A symbol gives temporary visible form to something invisible. The Western Wall in Jerusalem, for example, is not simply the last wall of the Jewish temple, as it is sometimes loosely described. It is part of the ancient retaining structure of the Temple Mount, associated with the Second Temple period, and became an extraordinarily important place of Jewish prayer because of its relationship and proximity to the ancient temple site. People pray there, touch the stones, and sometimes kiss them, not because limestone itself is God, but because physical place can carry religious memory and meaning. The Kaaba in Mecca offers another example. The Kaaba existed as a sanctuary before Islam. Islamic tradition connects it with Abraham and Ishmael. After Muhammad's return to Mecca, it became the central sanctuary of Islamic pilgrimage. Muslims circle it during the rite called tawaf, and the black stone is set into one corner of the building. The black stone is not secretly a vagina in Islamic theology. That interpretation may be imposed upon its appearance by somebody looking from outside the tradition, but that is not the meaning Muslims themselves assign to the act. This distinction matters enormously to anyone working with symbolism. There is a difference between "this resembles something to me" and "the people who created this intended that meaning." Those are completely different claims. A serious occultist should never be frightened of correspondence, but he should also never become intoxicated by correspondence. Everything resembles something else if you stare long enough. That does not make every resemblance historical evidence. Take Saturn. Saturn really does possess the astonishing hexagonal atmospheric structure around its north pole. NASA describes it as a vast six-sided jet stream observed since the Voyager encounters and extensively studied by Cassini. Scientists have even produced polygonal flow patterns experimentally under rotating fluid conditions. That is already extraordinary. We do not need to lie about it to make it mysterious. Now we can contemplate the hexagon symbolically. 6. Geometry. Boundary. Structure. Saturn historically associated in Western astrology with limitation, time, age, restriction, and form. Fine. Contemplate it. Make correspondences. Meditate on them. But then somebody says, a cube projected in certain ways can produce a hexagonal outline. True. Then somebody else says, therefore every cube is secretly Saturn. No. Now we have crossed from symbolism into assertion. A hexagon is also not a hexagram. A hexagon is a six-sided polygon. A hexagram is a six-pointed figure commonly formed from two overlapping triangles. And although the English word hex can mean a spell, the hex in hexagon comes from the Greek word for six. Similar sounds do not automatically mean identical origins. Again, correspondence is not proof. The same discipline applies to 666. Revelation gives the number as 666. In Older English, 60 means 60. If we expand that numerically as 600 plus 60 plus 6, we can certainly notice patterns. We can write 6-0-0-6-0-6. 3 sixes. 3 zeros. Interesting. Meditate on it if you wish. But understand what you have done. You have rearranged a number into a symbolic representation. That may generate insight. It does not prove that the author encoded every pattern we can subsequently extract from it. That distinction separates occult philosophy from occult paranoia. CERN provides another beautiful example. People notice looping forms in the CERN logo and C6s. They notice the Shiva statue outside CERN. They notice particle collisions and begin constructing enormous metaphysical stories. But CERN itself records exactly why the Shiva statue is there. It was a gift from India in 2004 celebrating a scientific relationship stretching back to the 1960s. The Natraja form of Shiva was deliberately chosen because the cosmic dance of creation and destruction offered a powerful metaphor for the study of matter. Now notice something fascinating. Knowing the historical explanation does not destroy the symbolism. Quite the opposite. The symbolism is openly acknowledged. Creation. Destruction. Transformation. Matter. Energy. Dance. Cycle. The mistake is thinking that symbolism must be evidence of a secret conspiracy before it becomes interesting. The symbol was interesting already. This is one of the great errors of modern occult culture. People become so desperate to prove the mystery that they lose the mystery. The ancients did not always require symbols to be literal mechanical diagrams. A symbol is powerful precisely because it can hold several meanings simultaneously. The cube can be matter, foundation, stability, Limitation. For directions extended into 3 dimensions. A container. A prison. A temple. A building block. None of those interpretations requires every cube on Earth to have been created by one secret Saturn cult. Symbols correspond. They echo. They rhyme. They do not always descend from one historical parent. This same problem appears when we study ancient kings. We asked, who is the first king? The truthful answer is that nobody knows. Kingship developed before surviving historical records can give us a neat beginning. Ancient Mesopotamia gives us some of the earliest rulers whose names survive. Gilgamesh belongs to very early Mesopotamian tradition as king of Uruk, but the legendary material surrounding him makes the boundary between history and literature difficult to establish. Enmebaragesi of Kish is especially important because he is among the earliest rulers in the Sumerian king list, also supported by contemporary inscriptional evidence. Then there is Nimrod. Genesis describes Nimrod as a mighty figure and hunter whose kingdom begins with Babel, Erech identified with Uruk, Akkad, and Kelna in the land of Shinar. Because Erech is Uruk and because Gilgamesh is associated with Uruk, later writers have tried to identify Nimrod and Gilgamesh with one another. Interesting possibility. Not established history. Again, we return to the same rule. Similarity invites investigation. It does not complete the investigation. But another question about kingship is more philosophically important. How does one human being become king while 10,000 others become subjects? A king without followers is merely a man wearing expensive clothing. His power exists through relationships. Farmers produce food. Soldiers enforce commands. Priests or traditions legitimize authority. Administrators count resources. Families preserve inheritance. People obey, cooperate, fear, believe, bargain, and organize. Power accumulates through the many and appears concentrated in the one. There it is again. The one and the many. The king looks like one powerful individual, but remove the people and the king evaporates. His power was never entirely located inside his body. It existed in a network. This tells us something larger about reality. Many of the things we treat as independent objects are actually relationships pretending to be objects. A nation. Money. Authority. Reputation. Language. Identity. Even the self may partly belong to this category. Take away every relationship through which something is expressed and ask what remains. That is an occult exercise worth doing. And perhaps that explains something else about education. We divide knowledge into subjects. Mathematics. History. Science. Language. Geography. Religion. Philosophy. Each gets its own room, its own textbook, its own specialist. This is useful. Division allows concentration. But eventually division causes another problem. We forget that reality itself never agreed to our departmental boundaries. The atom does not know that physics class ended and chemistry class has begun. The human mind does not know when psychology stops and philosophy begins. A symbol may simultaneously contain astronomy, mythology, mathematics, religion, politics, and psychology. Mysticism lives largely in the spaces between the boxes. That is one reason it is difficult to teach as an ordinary school subject. Mysticism keeps asking questions whose answers cannot always be standardized. What is consciousness? What is the self? What is meaning? Why does the same pattern appear in apparently unrelated places? What is direct experience worth? What exists before we divide existence into categories? Those questions are dangerous to rigid systems because they refuse to remain in one classroom. And this finally brings me back to knowledge itself. We have confused knowledge with memorization. They are not the same thing. A person may memorize every zodiac sign, Every Hermetic principle, every planet, every god, every Hebrew letter, every Sanskrit term, and every page of every occult book ever printed, and understand absolutely nothing. Another person may forget the names and suddenly recognize the principle operating directly in front of him. The highest purpose of symbolism is not collecting symbols. It is learning to see. Manly P. Hall repeatedly approached Taoist thought in precisely this spirit. Something universal may be perceived through an ordinary form, a simple object, or a natural movement, not merely through intellectual definition. In his surviving material on Tao, the emphasis repeatedly falls upon recognizing the infinite through the simple and immediate. That is why the water droplet matters. Not because water scientifically proves metaphysical unity. It doesn't. It matters because it allows the mind to behold something that abstract vocabulary struggles to hold. The droplet says, "Here is individuality." The ocean says, "Here is unity." The cycle says, "Neither condition is permanent." Now apply that inwardly. A human being appears. For a while he says, "I am this name. I am this body. I am this story. I own these things. I have these memories. I stand here and you stand there." Then everything changes. The body changes. The possessions scatter. The memories disappear. The name eventually becomes a sound spoken by people who never met the person who carried it. And perhaps, finally, even that sound disappears. Was the person therefore meaningless? No. Was the form permanent? Obviously not. And perhaps that is the distinction we keep failing to make. Impermanence does not mean unreality. A flame is real while burning. A wave is real while rising. A song is real while sounding. A life is real while living. But none of them has to be permanent in order to be real. The problem begins when we demand that temporary form provide permanent identity. Maybe it cannot. Maybe what we call ourselves is both real and temporary. Maybe individuality is genuine without being absolute. Maybe the droplet really is a droplet while simultaneously never ceasing to be water. That idea cannot be proven by poetry. But poetry can point toward the question. And that is what genuine occult philosophy should do. It should not demand belief. It should sharpen perception. Look at the symbol. Learn its history. Learn what the people who used it believed it meant. Study its geometry. Study its mythology. Study its psychology. Then allow yourself to notice correspondences. But never confuse your discovery of a pattern with proof that history intended your pattern. Keep one foot in wonder and one foot on the ground. Otherwise, mysticism becomes superstition. And materialism makes the opposite mistake. It keeps both feet on the ground until it forgets there is a sky. Somewhere between those extremes stands the contemplative mind. Not believing everything. Not dismissing everything. Looking. Questioning. Comparing. Watching one thing become another. Watching the many return to the one, and the one express itself through the many. Perhaps reincarnation happens. Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps personal identity survives death. Perhaps the question itself assumes too much about what personal identity ever was. Perhaps the great joke would be spending your entire life trying to preserve yourself for the next life, only to discover that the thing you were trying to preserve was never separate in the first place. Then who gets the buried money? Exactly. Fire burns. Water flows. The king requires subjects. The symbol requires a mind capable of seeing it. The many require distinction. And distinction requires something from which things can first be distinguished. Follow that backward far enough and language begins to fail. That failure is not always the end of philosophy. Sometimes it is where philosophy finally becomes contemplation. The name is not the thing. The number is not the reality. The symbol is not the principle. The self may not be the self. And the one is not merely one among many. It is the mystery by which there can be many at all. Amen. Let it be so.